The whiskey burned down Beatrice Dawson's throat as another round of laughter erupted from the table behind her, and she knew without turning that Mrs. Pemberton was holding court again, this time with fresh ammunition about the 34-year-old spinster who ran the general store and had never so much as produced a single child to carry on her family name. Oklahoma City in 1882 was not kind to women who didn't fit the mold, and Beatrice had broken that mold, shattered it, and swept up the pieces years ago when she decided that marriage to any of the fumbling boys in town wasn't worth sacrificing her independence. She slammed the glass down harder than intended, and the barkeep, old Samuel, gave her a sympathetic nod that only made the sting worse because pity was somehow more insulting than mockery. Barren as the desert, that one, Mrs. Pemberton's voice carried across the saloon with the subtlety of a cattle stampede. 34 years old and not a single prospect. What man would want a woman who can't even fulfill her basic purpose? Beatrice's fingers tightened around the empty glass until her knuckles went white. She'd come to the Dusty Rose Saloon for a quiet drink after closing the store, not to be reminded once again of how the town viewed her as defective, incomplete, less than. The other women at Mrs. Pemberton's table tittered like a flock of disturbed hens, and Beatrice felt the familiar heat of humiliation crawl up her neck. She reached into her pocket for coins to pay when a deep voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter. "I reckon a woman's purpose is whatever she damn well decides it is, and anyone who thinks otherwise can take it up with me outside." The saloon fell silent. Beatrice turned to see a tall man standing near the bar's entrance, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. He wore dusty trail clothes, a worn leather vest over a blue cotton shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. His face was weathered but handsome, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours under the sun and a jaw set with determination. He couldn't have been more than 35, maybe 36, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes that blazed with an intensity that made Beatrice's breath catch. "And who might you be to speak on matters that don't concern you, Mrs.?" Pemberton's voice had lost some of its venom, replaced with uncertainty. "Name's Fletcher Zane," the man said, moving further into the saloon with the easy confidence of someone who'd faced down worse than gossiping women. "I'm the new foreman at the Double Creek Ranch, just rode in today. And it concerns me plenty when I hear grown women acting like schoolyard bullies towards someone who's done nothing but mind her own business." Beatrice felt her heart hammer against her ribs. No one had ever defended her like this. Certainly not a stranger, and definitely not a man who looked like he could back up his words with action if needed. Fletcher Zane's gaze found hers across the room, and something electric passed between them, a recognition that went deeper than introduction or circumstance. Mrs. Pemberton sputtered, her face turning an unfortunate shade of purple. "Well, that's the problem, madam," Fletcher interrupted smoothly. "You never think before you speak. Now I suggest you and your friends find something more productive to do with your evening than tear down a woman who's got more spine than the lot of you combined." The women gathered their skirts and fled like tumbleweeds in a strong wind, Mrs. Pemberton shooting daggers with her eyes but not daring to say another word. The saloon gradually returned to its normal buzz of conversation, and Fletcher walked over to where Beatrice sat, removing his hat as he approached. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice gentler now, almost tentative. Beatrice nodded, not trusting her voice yet. Up close, he was even more striking, with small scars on his hands that spoke of hard work and a warmth in his brown eyes that made her want to trust him despite every instinct she'd developed over years of disappointment. "Thank you," she finally managed. "You didn't have to do that." Yes, I did, Fletcher said simply, settling into the chair across from her. I know what it's like to be judged for circumstances beyond your control. Those women don't know a damn thing about you or your life. They know enough, Beatrice said bitterly. I'm 34, unmarried and childless. In their eyes, that makes me either pitiable or suspicious, depending on their mood. Fletcher signaled Samuel for 2 whiskeys. Can I ask you something? I suppose you've earned the right. You want children. The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Beatrice actually laughed. That's a hell of a thing to ask someone you just met. I find that the direct approach saves time, Fletcher said with a small smile. Besides, we're already past pleasantries given the circumstances. Beatrice considered the question honestly. I don't know, she admitted. I never let myself think about it too much because it seemed like a path that wasn't open to me. No husband, no children. That's how it works. That's how it usually works, Fletcher corrected. But life has a way of surprising us. Samuel brought their drinks and Beatrice took a sip before asking, What about you? Do you have children? Fletcher's expression shifted, becoming both softer and sadder. I do, 3 of them, 2 boys and a girl. My wife, Caroline, died 2 years ago giving birth to our youngest. Fever took her 3 days after little Emma came into the world. Beatrice's hand moved across the table instinctively, covering his. I'm so sorry. Thomas is 8, James is 6, and Emma just turned 2, Fletcher continued, his voice thick with emotion. I've been raising them on my own with help from various ranch hands and their wives, but it's not the same. They need stability, a real home, someone who can give them the kind of attention and care I can't provide while managing a ranch. That must be incredibly difficult, Beatrice said softly. Fletcher turned his hand over so their palms touched. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. But they're good kids, resilient. Thomas tries to be the man of the house, which breaks my heart a little every time. James is quiet, thoughtful, keeps his feelings locked up tight. And Emma, she's just starting to talk, and sometimes she calls the ranch cook mama, and I see the confusion in her eyes when everyone gets quiet. They sat like that for a moment, hands joined across the scarred wooden table. 2 people who'd been beaten down by life in different ways finding unexpected solace in each other's presence. Beatrice felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight band of loneliness she'd worn for so long. Why did you move to Oklahoma City? She asked. Fresh start, Fletcher said. The ranch in Texas held too many memories. Every room in that house, Caroline was there. I couldn't move forward, couldn't think straight. When the opportunity came up to manage the Double Creek Ranch, I jumped at it, packed up the kids and everything we owned and headed north. Got in this afternoon. Where are they now, your children? At the ranch with Mrs. Carson, the housekeeper. She's got a good heart, but she's 65 and not exactly equipped to chase after 3 young ones for long. I came into town to hire some help, maybe find someone suitable to watch them during the day. Beatrice pulled her hand back, suddenly self-conscious. You should know that I've never been around children much. I wouldn't know the first thing about caring for them. Fletcher's eyes crinkled at the corners. I wasn't asking. Not yet, anyway. I just met you, Miss Dawson, Beatrice Dawson. I run the general store on Main Street. Well, Miss Dawson, I'm glad to make your acquaintance under such memorable circumstances. He raised his glass. To new beginnings and leaving small-minded people in our dust. Beatrice clinked her glass against his, feeling lighter than she had in months, maybe years. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily between them. Fletcher told her about his plans for the Double Creek Ranch, his hopes to build it into one of the most successful operations in Oklahoma Territory. Beatrice shared stories about running the store, The challenges of being a businesswoman in a world that expected her to be someone's wife and mother instead. When they finally parted ways, Fletcher tipping his hat and promising to visit the store soon, Beatrice walked back to her small apartment above the shop with a spring in her step that hadn't been there in ages. She lay awake that night thinking about brown eyes and calloused hands, about 3 children who needed a mother and a man who defended her honor without expecting anything in return. Fletcher came to the store 3 days later, ostensibly to stock up on supplies for the ranch. He spent an hour browsing the shelves, asking Beatrice's opinion on everything from coffee brands to fabric for curtains. She knew he was stalling, finding excuses to stay, and she didn't mind one bit. There was an ease between them that defied their short acquaintance, a comfort that usually took months or years to develop. "Would you like to come out to the ranch for dinner?" Fletcher asked as she tallied up his purchases. "Nothing fancy, just a meal and a chance to meet the kids. Mrs. Carson's making her famous pot roast." Beatrice's heart raced. "Are you sure that's appropriate? We barely know each other, and I wouldn't want people to get the wrong idea." "Let them get whatever idea they want," Fletcher said firmly. "I like you, Beatrice. You're smart, independent, and you don't take garbage from anyone. I think you're exactly the kind of person I want around my children. Besides, they need to see that there are strong women in the world who forge their own paths. When you put it like that, how can I refuse?" Fletcher's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his whole appearance, erasing years of worry and grief. "Saturday evening. I'll come fetch you around 5. I'll be ready." Saturday arrived with agonizing slowness. Beatrice closed the store early, much to the surprise of her regular customers, and spent an hour fussing over what to wear. She finally settled on a deep green dress that brought out the color in her hazel eyes. Simple but well made, appropriate for a ranch dinner, but nice enough to show she'd made an effort. Her dark blonde hair, usually pinned up practically, she arranged more carefully, allowing a few loose curls to frame her face. Fletcher arrived promptly at 5 in a wagon, cleaned up and wearing what were clearly his best clothes. He helped her up onto the seat with a gentleness that made her feel cherished rather than fragile, an important distinction. The ride to the ranch took 30 minutes, and they filled the time with easy conversation, Fletcher pointing out landmarks and sharing his vision for improvements to the property. The Double Creek Ranch was beautiful, sprawling across several hundred acres of rolling grassland with a main house that was larger than Beatrice expected. It was a 2-story structure with a wide porch, well-maintained fences, and a barn that looked newly painted. Cattle dotted the distant fields, and she could see several hands working near the stables. "It's bigger than I thought," Beatrice admitted as Fletcher helped her down from the wagon. "The previous owner built it up pretty well before he decided to retire and move back east to be near his daughter," Fletcher explained. "That's why I jumped at the opportunity. It's rare to find something this established." Before Beatrice could respond, the front door burst open and 2 boys tumbled out onto the porch. The older one, Thomas, had his father's dark hair and serious eyes. James was lighter, with sandy brown hair and a splattering of freckles across his nose. Both boys stopped short when they saw Beatrice, suddenly shy. "Boys, come here and meet Miss Dawson," Fletcher called, his voice warm with affection. Thomas approached first, extending his hand with grave formality. "Pleased to meet you, madam." "The pleasure is mine, Thomas," Beatrice said, shaking his hand seriously. She crouched down to be at eye level with James, who hung back slightly. "Hello, James. Your father tells me you're quite the reader." James's eyes lit up. "I like stories about knights and dragons." "Well, I happen to have several books like that in my store." Perhaps your father will bring you by sometime, and you can pick one out." The boy's face broke into a wide smile, and Beatrice felt something warm bloom in her chest. Fletcher's hand briefly touched her shoulder as she stood, a gesture of approval and something more. Mrs. Carson appeared in the doorway, a plump woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron. "Dinner's ready, Mr. Zane. You all come in before it gets cold." The interior of the house was comfortable, lived in but clean. Beatrice could see Caroline's touch in the curtains and the placement of furniture, ghost impressions of the woman who'd built this home. The dining table was set simply, and a high chair sat at one end where Emma presumably ate. As if summoned by the thought, a little girl toddled into the room, her chubby legs moving uncertainly. She had Fletcher's dark hair but lighter eyes, probably from her mother, and when she saw Beatrice, she stopped and stared with the unself-conscious directness of toddlers. "Emma, come say hello," Fletcher encouraged, scooping his daughter up. "This is Miss Dawson." "Bea," Emma said, pointing at Beatrice. Fletcher laughed. "Close enough, sweetheart. Dinner was delicious and surprisingly relaxed. Mrs. Carson had outdone herself with the pot roast, and the conversation flowed naturally. Thomas told Beatrice about his responsibilities helping with the horses, puffing up with pride when his father confirmed he was becoming quite skilled. James talked about the creek behind the house where he liked to catch frogs, and Emma babbled cheerfully, occasionally throwing pieces of bread when she thought no one was looking. Beatrice found herself enchanted. This was what family felt like, the warmth and chaos and love all tangled together. She'd convinced herself over the years that she didn't need this, that she was complete on her own, but sitting at this table, she realized how much she'd been missing. After dinner, Fletcher suggested they take a walk while Mrs. Carson put Emma to bed and the boys did their evening chores. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air had cooled to a perfect temperature. They walked toward a small rise that overlooked the property, neither speaking until they reached the top. "They liked you," Fletcher said finally. "I could tell." "I liked them," Beatrice replied honestly. "They're wonderful children, Fletcher. You've done an amazing job with them." "I've done the best I could, but it's not enough." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "I know we've only known each other a few days, Beatrice, but I need to be honest with you about why I invited you here." Beatrice's heart hammered. "Go on." "I'm not looking for a housekeeper or a governess," Fletcher said carefully. "I'm looking for a partner. Someone who can love these kids like they're her own and build a life with me. I know that's a lot to put on someone, especially someone I just met, but I believe in being direct about intentions." "You're talking about marriage," Beatrice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Eventually, yes. I'm not proposing right now, don't worry, but I want you to know what I'm hoping for, what I'm working towards, so you can decide if it's something you might want too." Fletcher reached for her hand. "I know what it's like to be alone, to feel like you don't fit in the world that's been laid out for you. I see that same thing in you. Maybe we're both broken in our own ways, but maybe together we could build something whole." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "I never thought anyone would want me, not really. Certainly not someone with children who might want a mother who knew what she was doing." "I don't need someone who knows what they're doing," Fletcher said, pulling her closer. "I need someone with a good heart who's willing to try. Everything else we can figure out together." "I'm scared," Beatrice admitted. "What if I'm terrible at it? What if they end up resenting me?" "What if you're wonderful at it?" Fletcher countered. "What if this is exactly what all of us need?" Beatrice looked up at him, this man who'd charged into her life like a thunderstorm and offered her everything she'd convinced herself she didn't want. His eyes were full of hope and vulnerability, and she realized he was just as scared as she was, just as uncertain about whether this leap of faith would end in flight or falling. "I'd like to try," she said. "I'd like to see where this goes." Fletcher's face broke into that transformative smile again, and he cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Beatrice breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle but insistent, tasting of coffee and possibility. She melted into him, her hands finding purchase on his shoulders, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. They returned to the house hand in hand, and if Mrs. Carson noticed their joined fingers and flushed faces, she was kind enough not to comment. Fletcher drove Beatrice back to town later that evening, and they talked the whole way about everything and nothing, the conversation of two people learning each other's contours and corners. Over the next several weeks, Beatrice became a regular presence at the Double Creek Ranch. She came for dinners, for Sunday afternoon visits, for impromptu trips to show James a new book or help Thomas with his reading. Emma started calling her Bee Mama, a combination that made Beatrice's heart swell every time she heard it. Fletcher courted her properly, with flowers delivered to the store and love notes tucked into her supply orders, with stolen kisses in the barn and long conversations under the stars about their hopes and dreams. The town noticed, of course. Mrs. Pemberton and her cronies had plenty to say about the speed of the courtship, the impropriety of a spinster suddenly playing mother to another woman's children. But Beatrice found that she didn't care anymore. Fletcher had shown her that other people's opinions were just noise, meaningless in the face of genuine connection and love. 3 months after that first dinner, Fletcher proposed officially. He did it at the creek behind the house, with all 3 children watching from a respectful distance. He got down on one knee in the mud and produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother, not his first wife, because he wanted this to be theirs alone, unshadowed by the past. "Beatrice Dawson, you've brought light back into this house and joy into our lives. You've shown my children what it means to choose love instead of waiting for it to happen to you. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and their mother and my partner in all things?" Beatrice didn't hesitate. Yes, yes to all of it. The children whooped and ran down to join them, and suddenly Beatrice was surrounded by her new family, being hugged and kissed and celebrated. Thomas was grinning wider than she'd ever seen. James was jumping up and down, and Emma was chanting, "Bee Mama staying, Bee Mama staying." They married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Oklahoma City. Beatrice wore a pale blue dress she'd sewn herself, with lace at the collar that had been a gift from Mrs. Carson. Fletcher wore a new suit that made him look devastatingly handsome, and the children were scrubbed and dressed in their finest. Mrs. Pemberton attended, likely out of curiosity rather than goodwill, but Beatrice refused to let her presence dim the joy of the day. When Fletcher kissed her at the altar, sealing their union before God and witnesses, Beatrice felt complete in a way she never had before. This wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself, but it was so much better than anything she could have dreamed up. The reception was held at the ranch, with half the town turning out for the celebration. There was dancing and food and music from a fiddle player Fletcher had hired. Thomas gave a toast that was surprisingly eloquent for an 8-year-old, thanking Beatrice for loving them and promising to be the best son he could be. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Later, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Fletcher and Beatrice stood on the porch of their home, now officially theirs together. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. "Are you happy?" Fletcher asked, pulling her into his arms. "Happier than I knew was possible," Beatrice replied truthfully. "Though I still can't quite believe this is real." "Believe it, Mrs. Zane," Fletcher murmured against her hair. You're stuck with us now. Best fate I could imagine." They went inside together, to the room that was now theirs, and consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Two people who'd found each other against all odds, building something new from the fragments of their old lives. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Beatrice moved out of her apartment above the store and hired a manager to run things during the day so she could be at the ranch. She threw herself into learning how to be a mother, making mistakes and recovering from them, slowly earning the children's trust and love. Thomas opened up about his fears of losing another parent, and Beatrice held him while he cried, promising she wasn't going anywhere. James showed her his secret places around the ranch, the spots where he went to think and raid, inviting her into his inner world. Emma simply attached herself to Beatrice's skirts and followed her everywhere, soaking up the maternal attention she'd never had. Fletcher was patient and supportive, helping Beatrice navigate the challenges of instant motherhood while building their marriage. They learned each other's rhythms and quirks, the way married couples do. Fletcher liked his coffee strong and black, and he always kissed Beatrice good morning before he went out to work. Beatrice discovered she had a talent for ranch management, keeping the books and organizing supplies with the same efficiency she'd brought to the store. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. 6 months into their marriage, Beatrice realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another 2 weeks before mentioning it to Fletcher, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx it. When she finally told him over breakfast one morning, his face went through a series of emotions too quick to catalog before settling on pure joy. "Are you sure?" he asked, reaching across the table to take her hands. "Pretty sure," Beatrice said, unable to stop smiling. "I'm going to see Doc Morris this afternoon to confirm, but all the signs are there." Fletcher came around the table and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly. "We're having a baby, our baby." Thomas looked up from his eggs. "Does this mean we're getting a brother or sister?" "It means exactly that," Beatrice confirmed, and was nearly bowled over by 3 children racing to hug her at once. Doc Morris confirmed the pregnancy that afternoon, estimating she was about 8 weeks along. The baby would arrive in early spring, a new beginning in every sense. Beatrice felt a complex tangle of emotions, excitement and fear and wonder all mixed together. She'd never thought she'd experience this, never imagined she'd carry a child of her own. The town's cruel assessment of her as barren had been wrong, just another judgment made in ignorance. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Beatrice was sick for the first 3 months and spent many mornings losing her breakfast while Emma patted her back sympathetically. Fletcher was attentive to the point of being overprotective, trying to prevent Beatrice from doing any heavy lifting or strenuous work. She had to remind him regularly that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and that women had been doing this since the dawn of time. As her belly grew, so did the children's excitement. Thomas appointed himself Beatrice's official helper, fetching things she needed and making sure she always had a glass of water nearby. James talked to the baby through her stomach, telling it stories about the ranch and all the adventures they'd have together. Emma seemed to understand that something important was happening, often laying her head against Beatrice's belly and giggling when the baby kicked. Fletcher was a constant source of strength and support, holding Beatrice when fear overwhelmed her about the birth, reminding her of her own strength when doubt crept in. He told her about Caroline's pregnancies, the joy and the terror, helping Beatrice understand that fear was natural and didn't mean anything was wrong. They picked out names together, lying in bed at night with Fletcher's hand on her moving belly, discussing possibilities and laughing at the more outlandish suggestions the boys had made. Winter arrived, bringing cold winds and the occasional snow that dusted the ranch in white. Beatrice nested, preparing the small room next to their bedroom as a nursery, sewing tiny clothes and blankets with help from Mrs. Carson. The older woman had become like a mother to Beatrice, teaching her things about child-rearing and offering advice without judgment. When Beatrice was 8 months along, Mrs. Pemberton came to the store with her entourage, making a show of buying fabric for a new dress. She'd been notably quiet about Beatrice's marriage and pregnancy, unable to find fault without revealing her own previous cruelty. But on this day, she couldn't seem to help herself. "I suppose one child is better than none," Mrs. Pemberton said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Though I heard you say you didn't even want children, Miss Dawson, or should I say Mrs. Zane. Hard to keep track of these sudden transformations." The manager, a young woman named Sarah, looked ready to defend Beatrice, but Beatrice held up her hand. She'd learned a lot in the past year about standing up for herself, about not letting small-minded people diminish her joy. "You're right, Mrs. Pemberton," Beatrice said calmly. "I didn't think I wanted children because I didn't think it was an option for me. You and your friends made sure I understood that I was somehow defective, remember? But it turns out I wasn't the problem at all. I just needed to find the right family." Mrs. Pemberton's face turned red. "I never said anything of the sort." "You said plenty," Beatrice replied, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "But I've decided to be grateful for your cruelty because it made me appreciate the real kindness I eventually found even more. My husband defended me the first time we met, telling me and anyone who would listen that a woman's worth isn't measured by her ability to have children. And then he said something that changed my life. I already have enough who need a mother. He gave me the chance to be a mother to his 3 beautiful children, and now we're bringing a 4th into the world. So thank you, Mrs. Pemberton, for helping me see that I wasn't the one with the problem after all." The store had gone silent, every customer and employee listening to Beatrice's declaration. Mrs. Pemberton gathered her purchases and fled without another word, and spontaneous applause broke out. Sarah hugged Beatrice carefully, mindful of her belly, and several customers came forward to congratulate her and share their own stories of overcoming judgment. Beatrice went home that evening feeling lighter than ever, liberated from the last lingering shame those women had tried to instill in her. She told Fletcher about the encounter over dinner, and he listened with a mixture of pride and anger, proud of how she'd handled herself but angry that she'd had to deal with it at all. "I should have been there," Fletcher said, his jaw tight. "I didn't need you there," Beatrice replied gently. "I needed to do that on my own, to prove to myself that I'm strong enough to stand up for our family. But I love that you want to protect me." Fletcher reached across the table to take her hand. "You're the strongest person I know, Beatrice Zane. Our children are lucky to have you as their mother." "I'm the lucky one," Beatrice said, tears filling her eyes with the easy emotion of late pregnancy. "You gave me everything I thought I'd never have." The baby came on a cold March morning, arriving with spring's first hints of warmth. Beatrice's labor started just after dawn, and Fletcher sent Thomas racing to town for Doc Morris while he stayed by her side, holding her hand and coaching her through contractions. Mrs. Carson kept the other children occupied downstairs, though their worried voices drifted up occasionally. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the morning and into the afternoon. Fletcher never left her side, offering water and encouragement, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. When fear overwhelmed Beatrice during a particularly intense contraction, when she whispered that she was scared of dying like Caroline had, Fletcher held her face in his hands. "Look at me," he commanded gently. "You're not going to die." You're going to bring our child into this world, and then you're going to spend the next 50 years with me watching our family grow. I won't lose you, Beatrice. I won't." His certainty gave her strength, and she bore down with renewed determination when Doc Morris told her it was time to push. 3 more contractions and their son entered the world, wailing his displeasure at the cold air and bright light. Beatrice started crying the moment she heard his voice, and Fletcher wasn't far behind, his own eyes wet as Doc Morris placed the baby on Beatrice's chest. "He's perfect," Fletcher whispered, his arm around Beatrice, his other hand gently touching their son's downy head. "You're perfect." They named him Frederick Thomas Zane, honoring both his father and his older brother. Little Freddie, as they immediately started calling him, had a shock of dark hair and Fletcher's strong features. When the other children were finally allowed in to meet their new brother, Thomas cried and tried to hide it. James touched the baby's tiny hand with wonder, and Emma announced, "Baby mine," which made everyone laugh. The weeks after Freddie's birth were exhausting but joyful. Beatrice recovered well, and Fletcher took on more of the household duties to let her rest and bond with the baby. She'd worried that she might love Freddie more than the other children, that the biological connection would create a division, but she found that her love simply expanded. Freddie was hers, but so were Thomas and James and Emma, all equally cherished, all equally important. Spring bloomed into summer, and life at the Double Creek Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under Fletcher's management, and Beatrice eventually returned to overseeing the store part-time, bringing Freddie with her in a basket while Sarah handled the day-to-day operations. The children thrived, growing taller and more confident with each passing month. On a warm evening in July, almost exactly 2 years after Fletcher had first walked into the Dusty Rose Saloon and defended a stranger's honor, Beatrice stood on the porch watching her family. Fletcher was teaching Thomas how to rope a fence post, their heads bent together in concentration. James was reading to Emma under the big oak tree, his patient voice carrying across the yard. Freddie slept in her arms, milk-drunk and peaceful, one tiny fist curled against his cheek. This was her life now, so different from what she'd imagined, so much richer than the lonely independence she'd convinced herself was enough. She thought about Mrs. Pemberton's cruel words, about all the years she'd believed she was somehow less than because she didn't fit society's narrow definition of womanhood. How wrong they'd all been, how wrong she'd been about herself. Fletcher looked up and caught her watching. He said something to Thomas and jogged over to the porch, taking the steps 2 at a time. He kissed her forehead, then Freddie's, his arms encircling them both. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am," Beatrice replied. "How grateful I am that you walked into that saloon and saw me for who I really was." "I saw a woman who needed someone in her corner," Fletcher said. "And I'm grateful you gave me and the kids a chance. You told me that day that you already had enough who need a mother," Beatrice recalled. "But you gave me so much more than children to mother. You gave me a family, a purpose, a home. You gave me love when I'd stopped believing I deserved it." Fletcher pulled her closer, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "You've given us the same thing, Bea. You took 4 broken people and made us whole again. You loved my children like they were yours from the beginning, and now you've given us Freddie. I fall in love with you more every single day." They kissed softly, a married couple's kiss, full of familiarity and deep affection. Thomas whooped from across the yard, making Beatrice laugh against Fletcher's mouth. "Looks like we've got an audience," she murmured. "Let them watch," Fletcher said. "Let the whole world see how much I love my wife." As the sun set over the Double Creek Ranch, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Beatrice felt a profound sense of peace. She'd been ridiculed for never having children, dismissed as barren and incomplete. But Fletcher had seen the truth, had recognized that she wasn't the one who was lacking. He'd said, "I already have enough who need a mother," giving her the gift of his children's love and trust. And in doing so, he'd given her everything she'd been missing without even knowing it. Life continued its beautiful, chaotic flow. Emma started talking in full sentences, usually demanding stories from James or help from Thomas. Freddie grew from a squalling infant into a laughing baby who adored his siblings. The ranch expanded, Fletcher buying adjacent land and increasing their herd. Beatrice's store became the most successful in Oklahoma City, her sharp business sense and fair prices earning customer loyalty. And through it all, Fletcher and Beatrice's love deepened and matured, growing from that initial spark of attraction and recognition into something solid and enduring. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration and misunderstanding. But they always came back to each other, always chose to work through problems rather than let them fester. When Freddie was 18 months old, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only joy and excitement. Their second biological child, a daughter they named Bella Rose Zane, arrived the following summer during a thunderstorm, as if announcing herself with dramatic flair. She had Beatrice's hazel eyes and Fletcher's dark hair, and Emma was thrilled to finally have a sister. The Zane family became a fixture in Oklahoma City, respected and loved by most of the community. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who helped run the ranch alongside his father. James became a teacher, nurturing his love of stories and knowledge by sharing them with others. Emma turned out to be horse crazy, spending every free moment in the stables. Freddie and Bella grew up as thick as thieves, always into some adventure or another. And Fletcher and Beatrice grew old together, weathering the storms life threw at them with grace and partnership. They added to the house over the years, building more rooms for their growing family, then later for grandchildren who came to visit. The Double Creek Ranch became one of the most successful in Oklahoma, a testament to Fletcher's management and Beatrice's business acumen. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. The whole town turned out, filling the ranch with laughter and music and celebration. Mrs. Pemberton had passed away years earlier, but some of her former friends attended, older and hopefully wiser, offering congratulations and reminiscing about the old days. As Beatrice danced with Fletcher under strings of lanterns, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She thought about that night in the saloon, a broken woman being mocked for her childlessness, and the cowboy who'd stepped in to defend her. She thought about Fletcher's words that had changed everything. "I already have enough who need a mother. What are you thinking about?" Fletcher asked, his voice rougher with age but still warm with love. "The beginning," Beatrice replied. "How you saw me when everyone else looked through me." Fletcher pulled her closer, moving with the easy grace of a man who danced with his wife thousands of times. "I saw you, Beatrice. I saw your strength, your courage, your capacity for love, and I knew I wanted you in my life, in our lives." "Best decision you ever made," Beatrice teased. "Second best," Fletcher corrected with a grin. "The best was kissing you at the creek and making you mine forever." They laughed together, gray-haired and weathered but still very much in love. Their children watched them with a mixture of amusement and affection, well accustomed to their parents' displays of devotion. Thomas caught Beatrice's eye and raised his glass in a toast, his own children clinging to his legs. Later, after the party had wound down and the last guests had departed, Fletcher and Beatrice sat on their porch swing, the same one they'd sat on countless evenings over the years. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, full of memories and love. You ever regret it? Beatrice asked. Marrying me so quickly, bringing me into your children's lives. Fletcher took her hand, his thumb tracing the wedding band he'd placed there 25 years earlier. Never. Not for a single second. You were exactly what we needed, exactly when we needed you. You gave my children a mother and me a partner. You gave us love and stability and joy. What could I possibly regret? I was so scared, Beatrice admitted. I thought I'd fail, that I wouldn't know how to be a mother or a wife, that you'd realize you'd made a mistake. We all felt that way, Fletcher said gently. But we chose to try anyway, and look what we built. A family, a legacy, a love that will outlast us both. Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the man who'd changed her entire life with an act of simple decency. I love you, Fletcher Zane. I love you too, Beatrice Zane. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. They sat together as the stars came out. Two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their separate lives. Beatrice had been ridiculed for never having children, dismissed as barren and incomplete. But Fletcher had seen the truth, had said, I already have enough who need a mother, and given her the chance to prove that biology didn't define family, that love could create bonds stronger than blood. And she had proven it, day after day, year after year, loving his children as fiercely as her own, building a family that was stronger for its unconventional beginnings. She'd been given a gift that night in the saloon when a cowboy decided to defend a stranger's honor, and she'd spent the rest of her life being grateful for it, nurturing it, allowing it to grow into something magnificent. As the moon rose over the Double Creek Ranch, Fletcher and Beatrice remained on their swing, hands joined, hearts intertwined, living proof that the best love stories often begin in the most unexpected ways. They'd both been broken when they met, both been judged and found wanting by a world that didn't understand them. But together, they'd created something whole, something lasting, something worth every moment of doubt and fear they'd overcome. The children they'd raised, biological and adopted, biological and chosen, all carried forward the lessons Beatrice and Fletcher had taught them. That family is defined by love, not blood. That courage means trying even when you're terrified. That the right person will see you for who you truly are and love you all the more for it. These lessons would echo through generations, a legacy more valuable than land or money. Beatrice smiled in the darkness, thinking about the scared, lonely woman she'd been and the confident, beloved woman she'd become. All because a cowboy had said, I already have enough who need a mother, and opened his heart to let her in. All because she'd been brave enough to accept the gift he offered and build something beautiful from it. And as they finally rose from the swing to go inside, to the home they'd built together and the life they'd created, Beatrice knew without a doubt that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she belonged with. The ridicule had been wrong, the judgment had been baseless, and the love she'd found had been everything she never knew she needed. It was a happily ever after earned through courage and choice, through patience and persistence, through the simple act of two broken people deciding to be whole together. And it was, in every way that mattered, absolutely perfect.